How do you teach sex and gender to your students?
Okay. Well, I talk about how sex and gender are two distinct concepts. Sex, we talk about in biological terms.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so how you're physically born. People often think there are two sexes, but we know that, and some would argue there's a continuum because there is such thing as intersex, where children or babies are born and it's unclear what their physical sex is. So sex itself is complicated, but sex is the biological. When we talk about gender, we're talking about cultural, what is learned, cultural behaviors. So, and a way to explain that is, for example, gender to be feminine, right? We do not come out of the womb knowing what it means to be feminine. We are taught that, and we are taught it in various ways, through our family, through education, through religion, through all the social structures that we have. So I feel like, well, that's how I teach it, is understanding the difference between cultural and biological. Then we could even talk about how gender is a performance. Gender is a way we perform femininity, masculinity, or some other aspect of gender. And gender's complicated. And again, it's not a dichotomy.
Okay. And why do you think it's important to teach this subject at this time?
Well, I've always thought it was important. I've been teaching it for many, many years. However, we are at a point in our culture where, because of more visibility of transgender, that the issue has become even more important to talk about. Although I hate to even say it's more important, because it's always been important for people who are transgender or who want to go against gender norms and stereotypes. So it's always been important, but there seems to be a moment that we're living now where we're more open to having this conversation. And there's been a lot more change in terms of accepting this notion of what it means, what gender means. And, this is part of why the Women's and Gender Studies program and getting a minor in this program is so important, because these are the kinds of issues that women were bringing to academic conversations in the 60s and 70s. And now they're starting to become mainstream.
And how do you tell a student who disagrees that sex and gender are two different things? How do you address that?
Well, it's hard to make someone believe something they don't want to believe. As an educator, I can offer information in a way that I hope is receptive to people. But if a student doesn't want to understand that core foundation of how we talk about gender and sex as two different things based on biology and culture, then if they aren't willing to open their minds to understand or accept that, then I don't know that there's much we can do. But I do think when you explain it that way and people start to go, oh, okay, we're talking about two different things here, then I do think people are receptive. Even if they disagree, they still might be receptive. And then people might disagree with ways that people perform gender, right? So transgender, or, there are women who don't want to perform femininity in traditional ways. And there are people who really want to see gender performed in traditional binary ways. We can't necessarily change everybody's ideas, but I'm an educator, so I think through education it's our best hope for gaining understanding.